I got up this morning and I started my day. God's mercy was with me all of the way. His goodness stayed close by to meet all my needs. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm never forsaken, I'm never alone. One day I'm a-moving to my brand new home. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm counting my blessings as I journey along. Good friends, a family, and a place to call home. The church where I worship, the Bible I read. My Lord is taking good care of me. When Satan comes tempting and he brings up my past, I tell him I'm forgiven and it's buried at last. The blood shed on Calvary now speaks for me. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm never forsaken, I'm never alone. One day I'm a-moving to my brand new home. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm never forsaken, I'm never alone. One day I'm a-moving to my brand new home. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking, He's always taking. My Lord is taking good care of me. What I was and I'm not what I'll be. You see, I've been born again. My life has been changed, completely rearranged since the day that Christ set me free. The old man I shed, I'm living, He's dead. I'm walking this heavenly way. I have no regrets, for nothing I've left. I'll stick with the old-fashioned way. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a hell-fighting, devil-denier who's washed in the crimson flood. I'm singing and shouting, no longer doubting, just waiting on Jesus to come. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. It's settled and decided, I'm not gonna hide it. I am not ashamed. The old King James Bible can still bring revival when the saints kneel down to pray. I believe Bible teaching and Holy Ghost preaching are the answer for this modern day. And old-timey worship, it's not gonna hurt us, we call it the old-fashioned way. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a hell-fighting, devil-denier who's washed in the crimson flood. I'm singing and shouting, no longer doubting, just waiting on Jesus to come. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a hell-fighting, devil-denier who's washed in the crimson flood. I'm singing and shouting, no longer doubting, just waiting on Jesus to come. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a born-again child of God. Here among the shadows in a lonely land, we're a band of pilgrims on the move, burdened down with sorrow, shunned on every hand. We're looking for a city built above, looking for a city where we'll never die. There, the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. Here in disappointment we so sadly roam, friends no longer speak one word of love. We have found contentment, Jesus promised us a home. We're looking for a city built above, looking for a city where we'll never die. There, the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. In this land of danger, we're going here and there, trusting in the blessed Savior's love. Though we may be strangers living in this world of care, we're looking for a city built above, looking for a city where we'll never die. There, the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. Looking for a city where we'll never die. There, the sainted millions will never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. Looking for a city where we'll never die. There, the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed.
Morning and welcome to Sunday School, and we'll start off as we do with any prayer requests. But before that, I'd like to welcome Brother Mark Wheeler and his wife Joy and the children. Please make them feel welcome. And we'll have prayer requests. How are you feeling, Brother Stacy?
Doing good.
That's good. And also remember Brother Jerry, his ongoing medical issues. Anybody else have any prayer requests? Charlie, what was the last name again? Okay, okay. Ben's dad. Anyone else?
Brother Brendan, remember Kelly and the kids, they'll be traveling home today. And also Mr. Ned will be coming home today too, so remember them as they all travel. And Brother Alan Kirk has been diagnosed with coronavirus. He's with us in our meeting, our youth meeting there last year, so most everybody knows that is. But anyhow, just remember Brother Kirk. They're gonna have to not have church for a couple weeks and stuff like that, but just remember him.
Yes. Anyone else?
Brendan, I wish y'all would remember Pastor Jack Shook, pastor of Roanoke Baptist Church over in the Pickens, South Carolina area for several years. Just last couple of years, he is retired from pastoring, and his grandson pastors the church now. But he is very sick. He's got some major health issues. Just had back surgery a month ago. They've had to drain fluid off of his back 3 times. But then yesterday he tested positive for COVID. And so pray for Pastor Shook.
Anyone else? There are no other prayer requests. Any more prayer requests? Okay. No other prayer requests. Brother Brian, can you open us up in prayer, please?
Father, we thank you for the privilege to be in the house of God today. Thank you, Lord, for what you've done for us, Lord, for your many blessings on our lives. Lord, I pray you be with us today, Father. Touch the man of God as he preaches, Lord. Touch the word of God. Lord, as it's preached, Father, and I pray you touch it, bless it. Help us be receptive to the word of God today, to the teaching, Father, to everything that's said and done, God. And pray that we bring honor and glory to your name, in Jesus' name.
This morning, open your Bibles, please, to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10, and we'll read verses 34 through 38. Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 34. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Christian commitment may separate friends and loved ones. Jesus was not encouraging disobedience to parents or conflicts at home, but said that his presence requires a decision to follow him. As we take up our cross and follow him, we will be set apart from others. Your commitment to God should be your first priority. And with that, you dismiss your classes.
Teenagers, y'all are in Miss Brenda's room this morning. All the younger kids will be in Miss Jody's class. But teenagers will be down there.
My goodness, it's a good crowd. I'm nervous. No, it's not new. Well, Brother Stacy, it's good for you to be back. Last week, I sure could have used you a great deal. We was in the Song of Solomon, and we taught the book of Song of Solomon all the way through, every detail. Well, we were all blushing But I tell you what, it's a great book.
Yes, sir.
It is a great book, and there's a lot of things in there as we learned last week that that you don't realize until you study the book. Till you study the book, and and there was some things that I avoided talking about, but because I said this is your assigned reading, this is your assigned reading, and so we come back and I look back there and everybody's got smiles on their face, so they must have read the chapter. Okay. What we're doing and what we've been doing for quite some time for the new faces that I see out there, we've been going through the books of the Old Testament like a survey. What we're doing is just taking a survey of the Old Testament and looking at several things in there. We started out with the Pentateuch, the 5 books there. We talked about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We talked about the children of Israel, where we talked about Genesis. Remember what we said Genesis was, the title of Genesis, which is the beginning of all of it. There's creation. And then it talks about Genesis is the seedbed of the Bible. And we really got into talking about that seed and how Satan has been trying to destroy that seed, talking about Jesus Christ and his coming. So we looked at that, then we talked about the Exodus going out and so forth, the law, and that first five books of the Bible. Then we got into a lot of history, quite a bit of history. We talked about the pre-exile, the books that talked about that, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, and 2 Chronicles. And we went through those, and we talked about Israel's development, Israel's downfall, and so forth. And because of their downfall, then we looked at, discussed a little bit the 70-year captivity, 70 years of captivity in that of Israel's at that time. Then we talked about, can you remember the 3 books of the post-exile that we talked about, where they were sent back? Persia, Cyrus the king sent these people back, the remnant. Did I say that right, Miss Brenda? Yes, sir. Thank you. The remnant that came back to do what? What did they do? That's exactly right. To build the temple, to restore Israel. And we're looking at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So we looked at that, the post-exile. And we're going to be getting into the prophets today. We're going to begin that process. And before we get into looking at each book, and I want to start out by saying that I'm not going to go in the chronological order that the Bible has it, with Isaiah to start with. We're not going to be going in that order. We're going to be going in the order of the historical aspects of it, the prophets, as we look at those. But then we looked at the 5 poetical books, and the last one was the Song of Solomon. I got through it, but it's a very interesting book, the Song of Solomon, as a type of Jesus Christ, and those types of things that we talked about last week. But we're going to be going into the prophets. Of course, we know that there's the major prophets. There's 5 major prophets, and then there is 9 minor prophets. But we're going to get into that, and then we're going to be talking about a couple of prophets that's not what I call the writing prophets. The writing prophets. We're looking at Elijah and Elisha. Elijah and Elisha, S-H-A and the J-A-H. So anyway, the appearance of prophets was always a sign. When the prophets showed up, it was always a sign of apostasy, and a rebellion was prominent in Israel. And as we go through the history and as you read through the Old Testament, that occurred quite often. Quite often. Even, in the book of Exodus. Here you got these groups, you read this stuff and you go, man, I just don't understand that. I just can't see why people can't understand that. We'll look at today. I can't understand what's going on today. Why do we continue defying God? Why do we continue? All the way from then, all the way up to now. It's the same thing.
Yes, sir.
Because it's human nature. And it's like this. God could have set his people saying, This is the way it's going to be. And we had to follow it. And it would be just that. God doesn't want that. It's kind of like sometimes I coach basketball and I work with kids. I've done it for 40-some years. It's like this. Sometimes you can just beat a dead horse in the head so much to where it's useless, if that makes sense. God wants you to do this. In your heart, it's, I want to. I want to get saved. I want to. I want to follow God. I want to do those things that He's put in our hearts, those commandments. You got to want to. It's just like playing basketball. There's many times, when I was coaching, well, I still am coaching, but in my coaching, just like I told the kids this summer, we're going to work this summer. And of course, there was a lot of restrictions, a lot of things that you had to go through. But we did, we worked. We worked on our shooting. But anyway, I told the kids, I said, we're going to strive to make 2,000 shots in 2.5 weeks. If you make 2,000 shots, then you get a T-shirt that says, I made the 2,000 point club. So during that particular time, the girls put up, most of the time there was 9 to 10 girls there, over 10,000 shots. 10,000 shots was put up. I had 4 kids make 2,000 shots. 4 kids to make 2,000 shots in that period of time. The other kids, everyone else made 1,500. Now, here's what I told them. And this goes along with what the prophets are trying to do. Prophets go around and they were preaching at that time, during that era, to the situation that was occurring in those during that time, just like today. Preachers get up and preach what the sin is of today. And that's what the prophets did. That's what they did in those cities, in those nations, in those countries. So, and I told those kids, I said, if you want to shoot, now we did this on Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 10 o'clock in the morning. Do what? Okay. Well, I was getting to that. Let me. Here, I'll sit down. You come up here. That's my wife. This is the way we do it all the time. But anyway. I said, if you want to shoot on Wednesday to make the 2,000 club, and those 4 kids did every Wednesday. If you text me, you let me know if you want to shoot on Wednesday. Well, the kids that made 2,000 point club, those kids that made that, every one of those kids shot on Wednesday. Those that didn't made the 1,500 club. I did not make it. I told them, you don't have to come to practice. You don't have to do any of this stuff. I want you to. And the kids got into it. I mean, they really enjoyed what we were doing. And when we finished, I had one girl say, well, you didn't tell me that you was going to open the gym up on this past Wednesday. I said, no, I didn't. I didn't want you here. I didn't want you here. That way I could have went fishing. I said, if you wanted to be here, you would have been here. Because I had 8 kids here on that Wednesday. You didn't show up. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I take that from reading the Old Testament book, God did not force you to do anything. He cast judgment on some things that went on. He cast judgment. There is judgment. He told you what he expected from you, but it was up to you to carry it out. And that's the way the world is today. There's a lot of people who don't want to. There's a lot of people that go to work. There's a lot of people who don't respect authority. There's a lot of people who go to work, and the reason they're going to work is not to make things better, is to get a paycheck, and that's the only reason they're going. We want the rewards, but we don't want to put in the time. We want the end benefits, but we don't want to put in the time. Just like this, when it was over, it was over. And you have one person say, well, I didn't know you was going to do that. Tough. Welcome to the game of life. Because if you don't put in your time, then you shouldn't get a paycheck.
Yes, sir.
So you shouldn't get a T-shirt that says 2,000. You get a T-shirt that says 1,500. Now there was two girls that was there on that Wednesday that didn't make it, but the following Thursday, when they all showed back up, they made it that Thursday, simply because they came on that Wednesday. So they wanted to get that to make the 2,000 club. But you had some of those kids complaining because they didn't do that. Should I said, okay, then we're just going to give it to you. That means that we're in the world of just this right here. And this is what they're brought up to. Everybody got a trophy. No matter what, if you played basketball, everybody got a trophy. Everybody got a trophy. So, all right. So we're going to be into the prophets. And any time, like we said, that the rebellion were prominent in Israel, the prophets raised their voices in protest against the idolatry, corruption, and blindness of their times. You know, and God wanted to call those nations back to Him. That was the purpose of the prophets, to go in and get them to go back to the calling of God. How many times do you read in the Old Testament where they went real well for a period of time and then they dropped off? And they went back to corruption, went back to idolatry. And you know, as we read this, so it's a mistake to think that a prophet's primary function was to foretell the future. They did that, but that's not all what they did. They were delivering a message to God. So when we talk about prophets, one of the things that you've got to remember this, it was men sent from God. Men sent from God. So, you know, and a lot of times the prophets did not understand some of their own utterance, some of their own, what they were talking about. A lot of times they did, but they did what God wanted them to do. And they usually spoke from a standpoint of their own people. And the Gentiles being mentioned only to the extent that those other nations would come into conflict with or blessings through Israel. It's kind of like this. Israel was the focal point for God. He wanted Israel to, kind of like Christians today, through their testimony, walk like a Christian, act like a Christian, to show other people what you have. Don't back down from that. That's what God was trying to do. And the prophets were doing that. And of course, you get into the New Testament, look at Paul. Look at all those apostles, how they walked and what they did, and how they influenced so many people just by their actions. Now, most of the apostles, you know, even in the Old Testament, they were tortured, they were tormented. And the same thing in the New Testament. We can go on. And same thing today. Look at today. Look at today. I would say that there's a lot of people turning away from Christianity because the world is downgrading Christianity. Look at what they're trying to do. So we're in a time now to where I go back and I look at some of these things in history, and history is repeating itself in a sense. So as you speak, and I just lost what I wanted to say. I love technology. This thing talked to me last week.
It scolded
It sure did. He says, I did not understand that. We was talking about the Song of Solomon. We was right into the part of it, and I said, I don't understand it either, so we just moved on. So anyway, let me get back to where I was at. We'll move on. But, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So we look at prophets. When you start getting into the Old Testament, without even looking at my notes, who was the first prophet, really? It doesn't have to be a written prophet, but who was the first prophet? Because in the book, in the KJV, it shows you that Isaiah is the first prophet that they talk about. Well, the first prophet that we're going to study, if we get there today, if I'll just move on and Brenda's keep going like this, but is the book of Joel. That'll be the first one we look at. But anyway, who was known as the first prophet? First prophet. Really the first prophet. We studied that in the book of Kings. So I'm giving you a test. This is a quiz. Don't let me down. It's in 1 Kings. Go to chapter 17. Well, all you have to do is Google 1 Kings chapter 17. Everybody's sitting there. Probably over half of you going right there and saying, I know who it is. It's Elijah. Oh, I give it up. But anyway, and you're afraid that you're going to say the wrong name, and because I used to do the same thing when I was in school. I'd keep my mouth shut because I was embarrassed to make a mistake. But if you go to 1 Kings in chapter 17, it talks about Elijah. And it talks about Elijah being really the first prophet that's mentioned here. And we'll get more into that just a little bit later. But we'll just go there. 1 Kings chapter 17. And just to give you a little bit about Elijah. Who was the king? Can anybody tell me the king during that particular time? Because when you look at the prophets, you also got to know the king who was in Israel at that time, or who was there. Ahab. Ahab. Really a godly king, wasn't he?
Yeah, good godly man.
He was a good godly man. No, he wasn't. No. No, he wasn't. But we know that Elijah was a mighty prophet of God during the reign of Ahab and Ahaziah. I'll get it right in a minute. In the northern kingdom of Israel. A lot of the prophets were sent to the northern kingdom first. Elijah and his successor, Elisha. Those two are the ones who started speaking to the northern kingdom. At this time, it split. Remember? It split in 931 BC. And you got the northern kingdom and you got the southern kingdom. In the northern kingdom, how many tribes were there? You're right, 10. That's exactly right. 10. There were 10 tribes. And then in the southern kingdom, that's good. 2. And that was known as Judah. So and I'm giving you this because it's important when we go through these prophets, when we start talking about these prophets, you got to know which, are they talking to Israel or are they talking to Judah? So Elijah and Elisha was talking to the northern kingdom. That was the first prophet. Why the northern kingdom? Because they was corrupted. They was corrupt. Judah, they had some good kings. Hezekiah. They had some good kings, godly kings in the southern kingdom. Did they have some bad ones? Yes, they did. But anyway, in the northern kingdom, around 873 to 852 BC, Elijah shaped the history of his times and dominated Hebrew thinking for centuries afterwards. So it's like this. It's kind of like Elijah left his legacy. And we know how he was taken up. Elijah was taken up into heaven on a chariot of a whirlwind, through a whirlwind. So his prophecy emphasized the unconditional loyalty to God required of the nation of Israel. The loyalty to God. Are we losing the loyalty to God today? It's not changing. It's not changing. So that loyalty to God, that's what God had told Elijah to do. Go back and talk to, and try to set these people straight. You can get into in chapter 17. Elijah predicts the drought. We know about that. Brother Stacy, he preached on that one time here. Brother Dustin, he's preached on it. And there's several others that's preached on it, as I've written them in my book. So, and then Elijah was fed by the ravens. That was just recently. Brother Dustin preached on that. So you can see that Elijah, what he was trying to do. And you go back and you look at the history, and there's more to that as well. So after Elijah left, who was there to see him actually go up into heaven? Elijah. So he was a prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel and succeeded Elijah. Elisha ministered about 50 years. Now, you get into studying that right there. There's certain commentators and people that has the doctorate by in front of their names and so forth, and you're supposed to listen to those people because they know it all sometimes. But anyway, that they change that. But if you take and you break it down in the book yourself, you'll see that Elisha was after Elijah because the Bible says so. And so people try to I'm not going to get into that. Let's go on. All right. He presented the Word of God through prophecy. Advised and anointed kings, helped the needy, and performed various miracles. Actually, Elisha performed more miracles than Elijah. So, Elijah's work within Israel was both personal and political. Some of the personal accomplishments included, the purified a spring. He raised the Shunammite, and he provided an antidote for a poisonous stew. These are different things, and you get into 2 Kings, and that's what 1 Kings and 2 Kings. 2 Kings carries more about that. So you can get in and you can look at that as well. Okay, prophets. Let me get back to where I was at. Anybody have any comment at this time? Anybody want anything to add?
Well, Dallas, I think one thing that in thinking about the prophets, a pattern that we saw established, and it's just the nature of man, but how that they would only during times of distress, most of the time would they adhere to the words of the prophet. But in prosperity, they would forego any kind of admonition. And it's the very same principle today. I'll never forget, as a young preacher, I was visiting with my pastor one day, and we had a couple in the church that had went through real tragedy. Actually, she had given birth to a baby. Baby died within 6 weeks, and just a real bad situation. And but they were a family that was in and out of church, things were bad. They were in church. Things were good. They were out of church. And after that happened, my wife and I walking hand in hand by the casket. That woman standing at the head of her own child's casket looked at us, and we said, we love you, we're praying for you. And she said, thank you. She said, but this is my fault. And that's what she said. I mean, she prompted that herself, and she said, I put God second, and God had to get my attention. And I mean, what do you say? And I said, well, we just want you to know we love you and we're here for you. And I mean, they got in church. I mean, they were faithful, offerings they were giving, they were working, they were laboring. And then in about 6 months, you begin to see it a little back. And I was on visitation. I was just a young preacher. And I asked my pastor, I told him, what they had said to me and my wife. And I said, preacher, I just don't, I said, if I really thought that was the judgment of God, I I'll be honest with you, I think I'd probably come to church 7 days a week, even nobody else was there.
Exactly.
You know? And my pastor looked at me and he said, Brother Stacy, he said, you need to learn something. I said, what's that? He said, you cannot serve God out of fear. He said, you have to serve him because you love him.
Amen. That's right.
And,
Because you love him,
and
that's right.
that pattern, brother. When fear,
It's good.
people flock to God, but when COVID's over, this same crowd, you've got a crowd now that's using it as an excuse not to serve God, but then you've got a crowd that's just flocking to God because of desperation, but you can't live a life of service to God out of fear. I think we should fear him. I think we don't fear him enough in the day in which we live, but I'm telling you that. So that's something that's stuck in my heart. My old preacher gave me that, and I'm telling you, it's like God nailed that in my heart, and that's what I want to hear. That I don't want to I just don't want to be a hearer of the word, but I want to be a doer of the word too.
That's exactly right. Doers of the word. You got to want to. You got to have that attitude that you want to, and so as we look at this, and we look at this nation, you look at this nation. How many times have we had a catastrophe occur in this nation, and we turn to God? You remember? I remember being at a place. I was in a seminar at a place at that time that 9/11 had struck, and they sent us home. Now, what was the first thing that everybody? Who did they turn to? Turn to God. How long did that last? A couple of months. And we was right back to where we were at. And just like Brother Stacy's talking about, sometimes I think you get a wake-up call, and that could be individual. I think there's times that God gives you a wake-up call. Sometimes we get too comfortable. We take things for granted. Do we take church for granted anymore?
Sure.
We've talked about it so many times, beforehand we've said it. We were taking church for granted. Now, this COVID-19 hit, and we wanted to get back in church, and we couldn't. So those are some of the things. Now, 3 of the prophets, as we're going to get into later, 3 of the prophets directed their message to the Gentile nations. To the Gentile nations. And you know one of them right off the top of your head. You ought to know the one right off the top of your head. He went to Nineveh. Jonah, exactly. That was one of the prophets that went there. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. So God gave him a wake-up call. He put him in a whale's belly or a big fish or whatever you want to call it. I like to caught that thing. I like to got that one on the end of my hook. But anyway, he was in there, and and you could go into that right there, and you study that book of Jonah, and I've heard this preached that is a type of Jesus going through the burial, the resurrection, and so forth and so on. And so Jonah was in there how many days? 3. So you get it. You can look at. There's a lot of typology in the Old Testament. It's a type, in a lot of ways. But the other one is Obadiah and Nahum. The first to Edom. Obadiah he went to the nation of Edom, and the other 2 to Nineveh. And we know the story of Jonah. We know that he went in and preached, and they all repented to God. That nation, am I correct? Correct me if I'm wrong. And we know that occurred. Why? God was in it. God was in it. And it did happen. Now, what happened to Jonah? He got mad. He was, it's just like this. When you look at this, and today, when things occur, we don't want it to happen. Deep down, some things, we don't want it to happen. Well, Jonah did not want that to happen. And he got upset because it did happen. But God was in it. It had to be. And so, anytime that occurs, in the book, what they're trying to say is that he was bitterly persecuted for his preaching, his message being considered subversive to the nation, to national interest, and the prophet himself a traitor. The prophets were the moral conscious of their age. God spoke through them to the people. The Bible is the only book that challenges unbelief by foretelling the future, staking its authority on the ultimate, certain, and complex fulfillment of its detailed predictions. So, throughout the Bible, well, I'll get into that in just a minute. I'll start to get ahead of myself. But as we look at the background of the prophets, the political and religious conditions of their times are constantly reflected in the writings of the prophets. So as we go through this, I want you to keep that in mind. They're reflected to the writings of the prophets. So these conditions need to be studied as a part of the background of their book. We're talking about nations. We're talking about nations. We're talking about Assyria. We're talking about Babylon. We're talking about what these occurred and what has happened. Why did God allow Babylon to go in and capture Israel or Judah? Because, see, the Assyrians captured the northern part in 722 BC. In 586 BC, then Babylon took away Judah, which left Israel nowhere. Now, what happened to those that was the 10 tribes? They were scattered. Did they ever get back? Sure, some of them did. Sure, they did. Because, see, in Judah, when they were captured, the Babylon captured Judah, they went to Babylon captivity. So when you study this, you got to talk about pre-exilic. Did I say that correct? You're talking about before the capture of Babylon to post-exilic. Is there any prophets that was in there during the capture of Babylon? I can think of one, David. Can you think of another one? Ezekiel, David. They saw all of it. They grew up in it. And we all know the story of the Hebrew children. We all know that story during that time. And David and all that during the Babylon captivity. Now, so the empires of Egypt played a major role. Assyria, Babylon, Persia overshadowed the whole prophetic era. The empties, the empires of Greece and Rome color the visions of Daniel. You go back and and you look at that, the Greece and Rome. So what you do is when you study this, you got to know the era, the time that it occurred. You got to know what countries are affected in what the prophets are saying, because it's a major part in all these. And there's several nations that we're going to go through as we study this, the prophets. Now, I would say more than likely, if I'm looking at this and the way that I've got it figured and the way that I go through this, we'll probably be here to the end of time. We'll probably be in here at the end of time. We started quite some time back at the beginning of Genesis. And we've been on this before, and I know and I hope you're getting some stuff out of this. I hope so. I know that I am. I know I'm getting a great deal. So anyway, as we look at these prophets, the pre-exilic prophets, pre-exilic. This is exilic. Is that?
I don't know. That's spelled.
Okay, IT. Yeah, pre-exile. All right, so anyway, in the 9th century, here's the prophets. Joel, Jonah, Amos, and Hosea. That was during the 9th century. The 8th century is Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk. So we're going to be looking at those, and then you get into the 7th century, and you're looking at Jeremiah, and you're looking at Obadiah. Brenda's favorite is Obadiah. Anyway, during the time of captivity, you had Ezekiel and Daniel. So, with all that, as we look at those, and so you've got to know some things about the nations, and we've talked about this quite some time. But as we go through this, I want you to keep that in mind. And you know, we know that Persia overthrew the Babylons, right? What did King Cyrus do? What did he do, King Cyrus? In other words, what he did is he took those people, those captive Israelites, those that were captured, and he sent them back to Israel to rebuild what? Temple. Now, as you study that, and you're talking about all the Israelites, only just a handful, a remnant, went back to rebuild the temple. So, it's important that we understand the role that these countries had during this particular time. And like, for example, you had Elijah, you had Elijah, you had Amos, and you had Hosea. These are the ones who prophesied in Israel, the northern kingdom. In the southern kingdom, you start with Joel, the book of Joel. And Jehoahaz was the king at this particular time. So Joel, the prophet of plagues. The prophet of plagues. Joel is very much a unique prophet. And as I tried to research and find some things, we don't know who he was, how old he was, or where he lived, or even for sure when he prophesied. A lot of it is just trying to go through the books, and and I looked up, John Phillips and a lot of these other commentators to try to find out a little bit exactly when this occurred. And I guess you just have to take an educated guess. But we do know what century we're talking about. So Schofield, Schofield thinks that even in his youth, Joel may have known Elijah and Elisha. So if you look at it, that's some time back. You're looking in the 8th century during that particular time. So, and if true, that casts considerable light upon the prophet and his time. But probably no references are made to time because Joel looked forward down the long ages to the dim and distant future. So, as you study these prophets, each one has a specific set of, I don't know how to say it more or less, had a specific way to preach and a message to preach. Because each country and each time, and as they go back, God wanted them to preach to this country. So anyway, now he concentrated on the nation of Judah. The 10 tribe the northern kingdom of Israel is not mentioned even once in the book of Joel. It is in Zion that the alarm is to be sounded. His wrath is stirred against the Philistines who were troublesome, hereditary foes of his people from their first day in the land, and against the Phoenicians who were never adverse to making money off of Hebrew people. The Philistines managed to capture and wished to put up for sale. Joel's prophecy moved in 3 circles, and that's what we're going to get into next week because I've run out of time. Can't hear you.
You won't be here next week.
Well, I'm sorry. Then week after next. So anyway, so we're going to be talking about those 3 things that Joel acted upon, and of course the first one is the locust plague. And what you can do is go to the book of Joel and read this Read this on your own as we begin this study of the prophets. Is there any questions or comments? Now, I know I've hit here, and I've hit here, and I've hit here. Now it's for you to put all that together and study it. So when I come back week after next, then you can pick up, and then you can tell me. And I'll learn from you. Any questions or comments? Anybody? Sounds like a church mouse in here. Everybody's just as quiet. Nobody has anything to say. Well, that's good. Let's end in a word of what? Go ahead, Miss Brenda. I know you got something to say.
I was talking about Jonah, I was thinking about Jonah being in the whale for 3 days, what his body would look like when it came out due to the acid and all that. That's what I was thinking.
I would say that probably God put him there. I'd say God protected him. So I would say that that's probably what happened. You know, the acid in those fish, and by the way, a whale is a mammal. But anyway, and it says in the book that it was a big fish. So I don't think it could have been a whale. I'm not saying it wasn't a whale, but anyway, a whale is a mammal, by the way. And now that's the biology coming out of me. It's not an osteichthyes. An osteichthyes is a bony fish. So anyway, the whale is a mammal, and it says in here a great fish, does it not? So that's the way that I take it. So it was some kind of big fish. So anyway, any other comments? But anyway, I would say that because in the belly of that fish, I would say that when he was regurgitated up on the island, can you imagine the regurgitation, Miss Brenda? I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Well, I got up this morning and I started my day. God's mercy was with me all of the way. His goodness stayed close by to meet all my